Okay, biology, chapter 14, plant physiology. You should have a note sheet. Yours is not filled in, but mine is. So, what is physiology? It is the science of how an organism functions. The science of how an organism functions. So, in this case, we're specifically talking about plant physiology. You can also do anatomy. Last chapter was plant anatomy. Chapter 14 is plant physiology. You can do human anatomy, human physiology. Typically, they're grouped together as anatomy and physiology. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is photosynthesis. We've talked a little bit about photosynthesis before, and you should know some about photosynthesis. So, that is the process where plants are taking light energy and they're turning it into glucose that can be used. That is how we get energy into our food chains and into our food system webs, so that the plants take the energy from the sun, they transfer into glucose. We eat the plants, or we eat an animal that's eating the plants, and we get the glucose from that then allows us to do cellular respiration. Remember, plants also do cellular respiration because they need to take the sugar and transfer it into usable energy. So they still have mitochondria and they still do cellular respiration. But photosynthesis is unique to plants, and we know that there are some bacteria that also do photosynthesis. So, chlorophyll traps light energy. So we have chlorophyll, that's what makes plants green, traps the light energy, which is used to enable carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide comes from the air, and water to react, producing glucose and oxygen. So there's even a little picture down here. See, I found a cute little. It's actually the exact same picture that's in your book, which I thought was funny that I found that on Google. But sunlight, carbon dioxide, water go into the plant, oxygen and sugars come out of the plant. Sugar doesn't literally come out, it comes out when we consume the plant. So the oxygen actually comes off the plant, goes back into the air. We breathe the oxygen in, we release the carbon dioxide, they use the carbon dioxide. So the oxygen just comes off the plant. The sugar is in the plant and then is used as energy, as a food source for anything that eats the plant. Okay, this takes place in the leaves. That's why they are green, because they have the chlorophyll. The roots supply the water. Roots go down, the water comes up. There's some water that can come in through the leaf. Carbon dioxide is absorbed from the air. So the carbon dioxide is floating in the air, the plants absorb it. So there are stomata. If you remember your picture of your leaf where you had the palisade mesophyll, the spongy mesophyll, and the cuticle. Yes. No. She's got to go to work in a minute. Okay. So, sorry, smell interruption. Okay. So, the stomata are on the bottom of the leaf. You have the cuticle on the top, and on the bottom of the leaf is the stomata. These open so that when carbon dioxide is needed, and close when carbon dioxide is not needed. So they open to allow carbon dioxide in and close when it's not needed. So how? And this is actually a pretty interesting process, I thought. So the guard cells, which are on each side of the stomata, are exposed to sunlight. Certain proteins build up inside those cells. So as you get, is it proteins or is it I have proteins written here, but I don't know that it's proteins. I was thinking it. I'm gonna have to double check that. But it's either proteins or I thought it was, if I'm remembering from what I read, it was ions, but I'm gonna double check that. So they build up. Either way, these molecules build up on each side inside the cells. Well, we know that when there's a higher concentration of a molecule inside a cell than outside the cell, the water wants to come in to even that out. And that process, if you remember, is called osmosis. So as that water comes in, then we have a higher turgor pressure. Remember, turgor pressure is which makes things that are wilted and like bleh, they get nice and straight. So think of like a piece of celery, it's all wilted, and then you put it in water and it will get water back in, and it'll have that turgor pressure, make it nice and strong. So if you have a wilty plant, you can add water and it should help build the turgor pressure. So that turgor pressure increases, which makes the guard cells bow out, and that opens up the stomata. Okay, xylem. So we're down here in this little box. Xylem. So capillary action. And I'm not sure if we've done the capillary tubes with you guys. I got to find where I put them, but we will do them if not. Water moves up a tube because of cohesion caused by hydrogen bonding. So remember, hydrogen is a special shaped molecule. Hydrogens bond differently. That's why you have capillary action. It's why you can have little bugs that can walk across the water. It's also why water will form a dome. So it has like the special property of water is that capillary action. It moves up the tube. So a really small tube especially, the smaller the tube, the faster it's going to move up that tube. So xylem is just basically a tube. Xylem is dead tubes. So it's dead cells that form a tube. The water moves up via capillary action. Now, that can only work so far. So in short plants, not a big deal. It can go right up. But if you have a larger, taller plant, it's not, capillary action is not going to pull it necessarily all the way up like a tall tree. So why does it come out? Because of a pressure difference. So in this case, think of a straw. And if you have a straw and you suck on the straw, the water's going to, whatever liquid's going to come up, right? So what is pulling the water up? For us, it's if we suck on a straw, we are pulling the air out of the straw. And therefore, something has to replace that air, and therefore it's the liquid. However, in a plant, obviously there's nothing sucking it, but we can still create a pressure difference. And we do that because water is leaving the leaves through evaporation. If you remember the water cycle that you've learned somewhere along the way, water is exiting the leaves for the water cycle. As the water exits the leaves, that makes a pressure difference. That means there's less pressure up here, more pressure down here. Pressure is going to go from where there's more to where there's less. Example of that. If you take a balloon and you blow up a balloon, don't tie it off, and you're holding it. You have lots of pressure inside the balloon, way less pressure outside the balloon. You let go of the balloon, the pressure goes out. Same thing here. Water's leaving, so there's less pressure up here in the top of the tree, top of the stem. There's a lot more pressure down here at the bottom. So the pressure wants to go from there's a lot to a little. Okay, so water exits the leaves by evaporation, which makes a pressure difference. So water moves up the xylem. Think of sucking on a straw. It's called cohesion tension transport. Cohesion tension transport. Okay, phloem. So xylem carries the water. Phloem carries the products of photosynthesis, the glucose, which can be changed in some other forms, other types of carbohydrates like a starch. So phloem carries the products of photosynthesis. It can't use cohesion tension because cohesion tension only goes one direction, but the products of photosynthesis need to go both directions, right? If you think about it, you're making the sugar up here in the leaves, and it needs to go down to the roots to get stored or down to other parts of the plant to be used. So it needs to be able to go both directions. And then when the leaf needs it, it needs to be able to come from the roots back up to the leaf. So pressure flows, the movements of solute due to osmotic pressure from a higher turgor to a lower turgor. So from a source, let me read that again. Pressure flow, movement of a solute due to osmotic pressure from a source, high turgor pressure, to a sink, low turgor pressure. So a source has high turgor pressure, lots of pressure. The sink has a little bit of pressure. Same kind of idea here, right? We're moving based on the pressure differentials. So example, sugar produced in a leaf is active transport. Active transport, if you remember, requires energy. So active transported into the phloem. So they have to kind of take the product and push it using energy into the phloem. Then it moves to where there's a low concentration of sugar. This can be used to remove sugar from storage to go to an area that the plant needs. So a lot of times the storage will be down in the root area, and then all of a sudden the plant needs some sugar up here. So transport up there. Growth. Okay, hold on. Let's do nitrogen fixation next. Organisms need nitrogen for building amino acids. So remember, amino acids build all proteins. All proteins are built from amino acids. Also remember that our DNA, including plant DNA, it requires amino acids. We can't use the nitrogen in the air. The nitrogen that's in their air is not usable by organisms. So microbes and plants fix the nitrogen to make it usable for life. So this is a super important role of plants, is that they take the nitrogen in the air, they can use it. They take it, they turn it into a form of nitrogen that we can use and have the amino acids we need. There's also microbes that can do that. So microbes would be microscopic organisms, bacteria, protists, those types of things. Okay, growth. The radicle produces the root system. So if you're thinking of a picture of the inside of a seed, the radicle produces a root system. The hypocotyl is the portion between the root and the plumule. The plumule will produce the leaves. The cotyledons give food from the endosperm to the plant until the plumule develops, then the cotyledons fall off. So those are those little tiny leaf-like things that give the plant food, and then they fall off when they're no longer needed. If you've ever grown seeds out in a garden, like zucchini for instance, you can see it really well. It'll grow these little tiny cotyledons, and then the real leaves come, and then those little ones fall off. Germination is the process in which a seed develops into a seedling. Meristematic tissue produces the roots, the stems, and the leaves. So you have this tissue, and then it differentiates into different types of tissue and organs. This is dependent upon photosynthesis, nutrients, water, and minerals that are all needed for growth. Okay, reproduction. So there's two types. There's vegetative reproduction, which is asexual, and then we know the other type of reproduction is sexual, where you're going to have two different plants involved. So vegetative reproduction is asexual reproduction in plants in which a new plant grows from a fragment of a parent plant. So this is going to be, for example, when you have strawberries and they shoot out a runner. That's vegetative reproduction. Or sometimes you can cut. There's certain plants you can make a cutting of. I am not a plant expert, by the way. I kill everything, so I do not have a green thumb. But you can take a cutting of it, and then you can put it in water, and new roots will grow. I've heard people do that with, that green onions, you put the roots in the water, and then more green onion will grow. But there's other plants where you can cut off like a piece of their leaf and stick it in, and then it'll grow roots, and then you can make a new plant. So that is vegetative reproduction. This does not give you any genetic diversity, though, because remember, this is going to have the exact same genetic makeup as the original plant. That is not good for long-term survival, because if you have, for instance, if you have a plant that has no genetic diversity, and so all of your strawberry plants in the entire world are exactly the same DNA. If you then have a disease that kills off these plants, every strawberry plant in the world dies, because that disease could infect all of them. If you have genetic diversity, then some plants will be immune to this virus and some won't. Those that are immune will survive, and those that are not immune will die off. And that is the benefit of genetic diversity, or one of the benefits. There's obviously other benefits, but that's one. Okay. So genetic diversity needs sexual reproduction. We need to take the DNA from two different plants, combine them into one plant, so that we're continuously having variety within that species. We're not making any new species here. We're just having variety within that species. So the stamen makes a 3-nucleus pollen grain, and it goes through very detailed explanation in your book about this. But the basics is the stamen makes a 3-nucleus pollen grain. So it's one grain, has 3 nuclei. The pistil makes an egg cell. It's a megaspore that does mitosis without cell division. So you have this one spore. It does all parts of mitosis except for the cytokinesis. It doesn't divide into individual cells. So you end up with this egg cell that has 8 nuclei, I guess. Pollination is the transfer of pollen from the stamen to the pistil. So you have pollinators that do this. You can self-pollinate, meaning you pollinate with yourself, same plant, but you still are going to get genetic diversity, at least somewhat, because how those genes divide up can be different. Or you can pollinate with other plants. When a pollen grain is on the stigma of a plant, it can fertilize a pollen tube. Let me say that again. When a pollen grain is on the stigma of a plant, it can fertilize. There should be a comma. A pollen tube forms to the ovary. So because if you are a pollinator, if you are a bee, and you're going from flower to flower to flower to flower, you're not trying to go to ones that can pollinate each other. So as you go from flower A to flower B, you may be dropping on flower B pollen that is not genetically compatible. It doesn't do anything. It just sits there. If it's genetically compatible, meaning it's from the same species, a pollen tube will form down to the ovary. One sperm nucleus fertilizes the egg, and the other fertilizes a large central cell, and that becomes the endosperm that provides the nutrition it needs until it grows into a plant and makes its own food. Okay, so photoparadisium. So, phytochromes are photoreceptors in bacteria, protists, fungi, and plants that detect red light and far red light. Blue-green in color because they absorb red, so they reflect the other colors. Determine when conditions are right for germination. So these are just different kinds of things within the plant. These are types of chromes. Then we have cryptochromes. These are photoreceptors in bacteria, animals, and plants that detect blue and ultraviolet light and contribute to the circadian rhythms. So it helps plants determine if it's morning, afternoon, evening. These are mostly gene regulators. And so there are some plants that the flowers will bloom at certain times of day. And so these are the things that help them know if it's that time of day. And then we have photoparadisium. It's a response to an organism to season change and day length. So as the days change, the day length changes, it helps plants know when to start growing. Okay. Typically, plants need 12 to 14 hours of sunlight. It's called the critical period. That's why different zones, if you grow a garden, there's different zones. And our zone, we can't plant too early because we won't have enough light and we could get a hard freeze. So we don't plant until Mother's Day here, because if we planted before Mother's Day, we could get a hard freeze. Now, sometimes if people can bring stuff in, my mom used to, if we were going to get a freeze, cover everything with sheets and that would help protect them. Some people will bring their things in. I don't know. I'm not a farmer, so farmers maybe plant earlier, but they would know whether it's going to hard freeze. There's good forecast and things for that. Okay, there's 3 types of plants. Long day plants, 12 to 14 hours of light to flower. So the aster, the barley, the carnation, 12 to 14 hours of light. Short day plants, less than 12 hours of light. So Christmas cactus, mums, and cotton grasses. So if you think about that, the Christmas cactus needs less than 12 hours of light. That makes sense because it's a Christmas cactus. It blooms around Christmas time. Also, mums. When do we usually see mums? And chrysanthemums is the whole word, but I didn't want to type out chrysanthemums. We have those are a fall plant. If you think about, you see those up in the fall. Obviously, when we have less than 12 to 14 hours of light. And then day neutral plants. They can have a variety of length of light. So corn, cucumbers, kale, dandelions. We obviously know dandelions fit in here because dandelions are one of the first things to grow as soon as things start growing in the spring. We will start to see dandelions, and they will be one of the first things that we see. Okay. Thermoparadisium. It's the response of a plant to changing temperatures during changing seasons. So all of these are just hormones within the plant. Hold on. These are not hormones. Hormones come later. These are not hormones, but these are processes within the plant that help them do these things. Okay. Plants in winter. We have 3 types for non-woody stems. You have annual, perennial, and biennial. Annuals live 1 growing season. So these are a lot of times the flowers that people plant. When you go to Menards and you buy flowers that are pretty and you put them in front of your house, a lot of times those are annuals. They live 1 growing season. Perennials live multiple growing seasons. So you buy them, you plant them, and then they just keep coming back. More cost effective, although they are usually more expensive to buy in the first place. Biennial are plants that live 2 growing seasons. They flower in the 2nd growing season. So those are non-woody stems. So these are typically what you think of as like flowers. Then we have evergreen. You know evergreens. They are green all year long. Evergreen. Deciduous produce less chlorophyll as light decreases. And then it saves that sugar for when there are no leaves present. So the deciduous trees are the ones that will lose their leaves. And we saw a great example this last week during the blizzard of why that is a good thing during the winter, because if there were leaves on all these trees, when we had ice and snow, we probably would have had more limbs down. So, okay, abscission is the plant seals off the connection to a leaf, so the leaf dies and falls off. We don't want all these leaves. We don't want, when there's not much sunlight and you're not going to be productive, we don't want to have to support the leaves. We also don't want, okay, so it listed here. Why do we do this? Because the leaf would freeze and damage the tree. Also, because the leaf is really thin. So if you think about anything that's thin, it's going to freeze easier and faster than something that's thick. So if you've ever frozen meat, for instance, like I like to cook ground beef and then freeze it. You want to make your bags as flat as possible so that you can put them in the freezer. They'll freeze quickly. If you put them in like a big chunk, like I take it and put it in an ice cream bucket and put that in the freezer, it's going to take way longer for that to freeze or defrost than something thin. So the leaves are thin, they could freeze and then damage the whole tree. Also, plants need fewer nutrients, so the plant can just go dormant because it doesn't have the leaf. Quiescence. Seeds rest and growth of embryo is suspended, so the seeds can just rest. Senescence is the process of aging leading to death. So eventually plants do need to age and die off. Okay, plant hormones. Hormones provide instruction to direct cells. All organisms have hormones. Phytohormones are plant hormones. That phyto means plant. Auxins are growth and flowering, used in food production to increase harvest yield and cause fruit to ripen at the same time. So, some of these hormones can be used artificially. They're made artificially and applied to plants to help our food supply be higher. Gibberellins, germination, growth, flowering, fruit, and seed quiescence. Cytokinins, root production, shoot production, and fruit set, vascular development. Abscisic acid, seed quiescence, meaning dying. See, that's the rest, yeah. Environment changes and stress hormone. Ethylene is flowering, fruit development, abscission. So plants can be sprayed with this ethylene to help them ripen. So especially something like bananas that we transport are really far away. They can pick them when they're green and then they can spray them with the ethylene. Also, if you take a banana that is really ripe, it produces ethylene, and you put it next to other fruit, it will start to make the other fruit ripen faster or go bad faster. So you can't actually, I've heard people that could take a banana and an avocado. So, you buy avocados and they're hard, so there are people who will take a banana and an avocado and put them in a paper bag, and the ethylene from the banana is supposed to help the avocado ripen. I think I tried it once, but I don't eat a lot of avocados, so. Brassinosteroids are structure and signaling. So then tropism. Tropism is the response of a plant to environmental stimulus whereby roots, stems, or leaves move toward or away from the stimulus. So if you haven't ever had a plant that you put by a window, the plant will tend to lean towards the window. Okay, so you have different kinds. You have chemotropism, where it responds to a chemical. Thermotropism is responding to temperature. Traumotropism is responding to a wound. Electrotropism, phototropism is darkness. Aerotropism is oxygen. Phototropism, light. Gravitropism, it's why if you take a plant and you like put it upside down, it'll actually still grow the right way. That's kind of crazy. And thigmotropism, touch. So those are all the different types. So that is the basics of plant physiology.